Hey guys, tonight we step into the smoldering aftermath of a city whose walls once reached the sky, where the dust of Troy still hangs heavy in the air and the scent of fire lingers like a stubborn ghost. You probably won't survive imagining the chaos, ships aflame, cries echoing, and Odysseus grinning behind a giant wooden horse without a shiver. But that's the threshold you cross tonight. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post your location and local time. It's always fascinating to know where in the world someone is quietly imagining burning cities at 11 p.m. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the remnants of Troy, the sand sticky with ash and spilled wine, past toppled statues and the silent, mournful gaze of abandoned gods. Odysseus moves among his men, the architect of subterfuge, already planning the next steps in what will become 10 years of wandering, a marathon of trial and endurance. Historians still argue whether the wooden horse was a clever ruse or an embellishment added by later storytellers. But as you watch, it doesn't matter. Its symbolic brilliance is undeniable. Quirky asides bubble up. Some tales suggest the Trojans actually debated inviting the horse inside for a closer look, thinking it might be a gift. Which is funny if you imagine them arguing over decorations while soldiers lurk inside. You trudge alongside Odysseus as he signals from inside, the creaking wood echoing tension and strategy. You probably won't survive picturing the absurdity and gravity together without a grin or a gasp. But that's the duality of cunning warfare, simultaneously deadly serious and almost theatrical. Among the ruins, you see glimpses of ordinary human resilience, women carrying what they can save, elders guiding bewildered children, and soldiers counting spoils, all under the faint shadow of Greek gods who seem to watch with detached curiosity. Historians still argue whether divine intervention or human planning played the larger role in the fall of Troy, but your footsteps echo the uncertainty, each stride a rhythm of observation and awe. As night descends over the burning city, you trudge past the quiet flames, the smell of charred timber in your nostrils, and the distant roar of celebration mixing with mourning. Odysseus stands apart for a moment, gazing at the horizon, already plotting the long, perilous journey that awaits him. You probably won't survive imagining the weight of responsibility pressing on him without a quiet sense of dread and admiration. But it's in this balance of genius, courage, and emerging legend that the story truly begins. You trudge alongside Odysseus as his fleet pushes away from the smoldering coast of Troy, the sea stretching before you like an endless ribbon of possibility and peril. You probably won't survive imagining the creaking of oars, the slap of waves against wooden hulls, and the salty sting in your eyes without feeling the chill of both anticipation and dread. The Greek ships, sleek but heavily laden, ride unevenly over swells, each wave a gentle reminder that the ocean is both ally and adversary. Historians still argue whether the storms that followed the sack of Troy were ordinary Mediterranean tempests or dramatized interventions of angry gods, but your feet feel the rhythm of a relentless, living sea beneath them. Odysseus navigates the early days with a mixture of caution and bravado, issuing orders, checking the rigging, and murmuring advice to crew members. quirky tales survive that he once tied himself to the mast to hear a distant siren song without being lured, an almost comical image of a hero bound by both curiosity and strategy, which historians still debate as literal truth or symbolic anecdote. You probably won't survive picturing this scene without a smile as the wind whips your hair and the ship tilts precariously. Storm clouds gather quickly, gray and menacing, their shadows dancing across the decks. You trudge alongside as sailors scramble, feet slipping on wet wood, hands grasping ropes and each other. Odysseus's voice cuts through the wind, calm yet commanding, demonstrating that leadership here isn't about brute strength, but presence, decisiveness, and trust. Historians still argue whether his skills were exceptional for the era or mythologized by Homeric exaggeration. But the coordination of 100 oarsmen in tempestuous waves speaks to both natural talent and disciplined practice. The gods' tempers seem to manifest in every rolling wave. You glimpse lightning splitting the horizon, hear thunder resonate like the voice of Poseidon himself, and smell the ozone-heavy air. Quirky accounts suggest sailors once offered sacrificial libations mid-storm to appease angry deities, tossing small animals or wine overboard, a ritual historians still debate for its prevalence or symbolic exaggeration. You probably won't survive imagining tiny offerings vanishing into monstrous waves without shaking your head at the blend of fear and hope that drives human behavior. Night falls, turning the storm into a black velvet expanse, pierced by flashes of lightning. You trudge through the rhythm of the crew's prayers, the spray of brine, and Odysseus's steady voice guiding, navigating, calculating every decision. Historians still argue whether the narrative emphasizes divine intervention or mortal ingenuity, but you feel the tension, the exhilaration, and the terror simultaneously. You probably won't survive imagining the cumulative strain of months of travel without a shiver. Yet it's here, amid divine suspicion and natural fury, that the first lessons of patience, resilience, and respect for forces beyond control are etched into every muscle, every thought, and every heartbeat. You trudge wearily into calmer waters after the storms, the scent of brine still clinging to your hair when the strange, almost hypnotic allure of the lotus eaters emerges. You probably won't survive imagining the sight of a seemingly tranquil shore dotted with lotus flowers whose fragrance lulls men into blissful forgetfulness without a sudden creeping sense of danger. But that's exactly what Odysseus confronts here. Historians still argue whether the lotus is a literal plant or a metaphorical symbol for distraction and indulgence. Yet as you watch, the effect on the men is immediate and profound. Their eyes glaze, their bodies relax, and their minds drift away from duty. Quirky details pop into focus as you trudge closer. Some stories suggest the sailors, upon tasting the lotus, laughed at nothing and demanded to stay on the shore indefinitely, forgetting homes, wives, and the promise of Ithaca. You probably won't survive picturing this absurd yet horrifyingly seductive behavior without an uneasy chuckle, but it perfectly illustrates the tension between human vulnerability and the unyielding call of purpose. Odysseus, sharp-eyed and patient, realizes that persuasion alone won't suffice. He must physically haul his men back to the ships, chaining them gently to ensure their safe return to reality. The shore seems almost idyllic. Soft sands, a gentle breeze carrying sweet aromas, and a distant sun glinting off calm waters. Yet you sense the underlying threat, the insidious pull of letting go. Historians still debate whether Homer intended this episode to symbolize the dangers of hedonism or simply provide an exotic adventure. But the duality of beauty and peril is palpable. You probably won't survive imagining the internal battle of men torn between comfort and duty, lulled by the intoxicating scent of lotus without feeling a twinge of empathy for their lapse. Odysseus's leadership shines here, not through brute force, but clarity of purpose. You trudge alongside him as he reminds the men of their home, their families, and the long, perilous journey ahead, the words cutting through the fog of forgetfulness like a lighthouse beam. Quirky anecdotes suggest he may have promised small rewards or told fantastical tales of what awaited them to spark their memory. Historians still argue whether these are narrative embellishments or reflective of actual motivational strategies. You probably won't survive picturing the creativity required to save men from their own lapses without a wry smile at human frailty. As the men are reluctantly pulled from the lotus's embrace, the gentle waves lap against the hulls of the ships, and you feel the dual pulse of relief and residual temptation. You trudge on, realizing that the first true test of Odysseus's cunning is not in battle, but in maintaining loyalty, focus, and discipline among those who would rather surrender to comfort. Historians still debate the exact location of the lotus eaters, but the lessons, resisting distraction, holding steadfast to purpose, and leading with patience, resonate as timeless truths. You probably won't survive imagining the quiet but relentless tug of temptation without a subtle shiver. Yet it is precisely this struggle that begins to define the character of both leader and crew alike. You trudge cautiously toward a rocky cave on a remote, sun-drenched island, and there it is, Polyphemus, the Cyclops, a towering figure with one glaring eye that glows like molten amber in the dim light of his lair. You probably won't survive imagining the sheer scale of him, the muscles, the beard, the utter absence of hospitality, without a jolt of both awe and dread. Historians still argue whether the Cyclops was ever intended as a literal creature or as a mythic embodiment of untamed, lawless forces. But as you watch, the danger feels immediate, physical, and inescapable. Quirky tales drift past you like drifting sails. Supposedly, some later accounts say Polyphemus kept a tiny garden of sheep as if he were domesticating innocence amid terror, a detail historians still debate as either metaphorical or genuine mythic flourish. You probably won't survive picturing the juxtaposition, the gentle grazing of lambs beneath the shadow of a man-eating giant, without a mixture of anxiety and disbelief. Odysseus, always calculating, moves silently with a small band of his bravest men, curiosity and survival warring in their hearts. The Cyclops' cave is dark and humid, the scent of unwashed fur and goat filling the air. You trudge past scattered bones and makeshift furniture, the echo of Polyphemus's voice resonating like distant thunder. Historians still argue whether the episode reflects real dangers faced by ancient sailors encountering isolated tribes or is purely allegorical, but the tension is palpable. You probably won't survive imagining Odysseus's internal calculations, the blend of courage, deception, and improvisation, without a subtle thrill of vicarious suspense. The encounter escalates quickly. The Cyclops blocks the exit, demanding to know who trespasses. Odysseus, clever and audacious, identifies himself ambiguously, telling the giant that his name is nobody. Quirky asides suggest that even Polyphemus's single eye couldn't process the concept of being fooled linguistically, which historians still debate as evidence of ancient humor or narrative invention. You probably won't survive picturing a giant yelling in confusion, "Nobody hurt me," while Odysseus and his men plot escape without stifling a grin at the clever absurdity. Through cunning, patience, and a carefully timed act of violence with a sharpened stake, Odysseus blinds the Cyclops, securing a narrow path to freedom. You trudge behind as the men flee, the echoes of Polyphemus's wrathful roars chasing them across rocky cliffs to the awaiting ships. Historians still argue whether this story reflects human ingenuity triumphing over brute force or serves as a moral caution against hubris. But the lesson is clear. Intelligence, creativity, and timing are as lethal as strength. You probably won't survive imagining the terror and exhilaration intertwined without a shiver. Yet it is this balance of fear and cunning that defines Odysseus's enduring legend. You trudge across open seas now, the smell of salt sharp in your nostrils, the taste of wind teasing your lips, as Odysseus carries with him a small but consequential gift from Aeolus, the bag of winds. You probably won't survive picturing the tension in the sailors' hands as they peer into this mysterious sack without a sense of both wonder and foreboding. Historians still argue whether Aeolus was a literal figure or a symbolic personification of the unpredictable elements of nature. But the lesson of controlling forces beyond your grasp feels as immediate as the slap of waves against the hull. Quirky details drift across your mind. You trudge past the image of sailors, wide-eyed and curious, wondering if the bag contains treasures, tiny storms, or even mischievous spirits. Some tales say a few men peered surreptitiously, whispering about using the wind for their own gain, a behavior historians still debate as illustrative of human temptation or simply storytelling embellishment. You probably won't survive imagining Odysseus returning to find the bag opened prematurely without wincing at the inevitability of human error and its consequences. The seas ahead appear deceptively calm as you trudge on, the water gleaming under a high sun, a false promise of ease and speed. Odysseus instructs the crew carefully. The bag must remain sealed until they are safely out of sight of the Aeolian island. The tension is palpable, a silent testament to trust, obedience, and foresight. Historians still argue whether this episode is a morality tale about self-control or simply an adventure narrative. But the stakes are no less real for you as you imagine the scene. Inevitably, curiosity and impatience betray the men. You trudge alongside as they untie the bag, unleashing a tempest that hurls ships backward toward the island, wind screaming like a living thing in your ears. Quirky anecdotes suggest some sailors attempted to shout apologies at the sky or even bargain with Aeolus directly, which historians still debate as playful exaggeration or reflection of ancient ritual behavior. You probably won't survive imagining this mix of panic, guilt, and comic futility without a shiver and a chuckle at human fallibility. Odysseus, though frustrated, recalibrates, demonstrating the blend of patience, clever thinking, and leadership that defines him. You trudge behind as he reclaims authority, steadies the sails, and nudges the fleet toward distant horizons. Historians still argue whether the story emphasizes divine will or human responsibility, but the truth resonates in the rhythm of the oars, the tension of rope in your hands, and the palpable lesson. Power and fortune are fleeting, easily unraveled by carelessness, curiosity, or disobedience. You probably won't survive imagining the mixture of triumph and setback without a faint tightening in your chest. But it's this interplay of control, chaos, and ingenuity that begins to shape the pattern of a decade-long journey across unknown seas. You trudge cautiously toward the jagged coastline of the Laestrygonians' domain, where the cliffs loom like stone sentinels and the waters narrow into a treacherous channel. You probably won't survive imagining the sheer scale of these giant cannibals without a shiver, the eerie silence punctuated only by the distant, ominous rumble of their laughter or the splash of enormous limbs. Historians still argue whether the Laestrygonians are purely mythical exaggerations or inspired by encounters with unknown tribes. But the threat they represent, vigilance against the unforeseen, feels tangibly real. Quirky tales circulate among scholars. Some accounts suggest these giants had a peculiar habit of using enormous hollowed-out trees as bathing tubs, which you probably won't survive picturing without a mix of amusement and horror. You trudge along with Odysseus's men, alert and tense, each step a delicate negotiation between the desire to explore and the instinct for survival. The narrow strait leaves no room for error, and the fleet's formation tightens instinctively as if the ships themselves recognize the danger. The first sighting is subtle, almost surreal. Massive shadows moving with grace that belies their size, eyes reflecting sunlight like molten gold. You trudge closer, heart hammering, as Odysseus signals a halt and whispers strategies, his voice calm yet firm against the rising fear. Historians still debate whether the description of the giants was intended to heighten suspense or serve as a metaphor for overwhelming obstacles. But for you, the tension is visceral and immediate. As the Laestrygonians reveal themselves, chaos erupts. They hurl boulders and overturn ships with effortless strength. You trudge through the scramble, the cries of men mixing with the roar of waves and the thunderous steps of the giants. Quirky accounts even mention that some of the sailors were flung into the air only to land in the water with comic inevitability, a grim yet oddly humorous detail historians still debate for its authenticity. You probably won't survive picturing the mix of terror and absurdity without a nervous chuckle as adrenaline spikes in your veins. Odysseus's leadership shines again. He guides the surviving ships through narrow channels and around jagged rocks with a blend of quick thinking and fearless determination. You trudge in the wake of the fleet, noticing how small decisions, timing a turn, judging a wave, determine life or death. Historians still argue whether this encounter reflects a universal lesson in vigilance or simply adds narrative tension, but the meaning resonates. In a world full of giants, literal or metaphorical, survival hinges on perception, courage, and unflinching action. You probably won't survive imagining the mixture of panic, relief, and awe without feeling your own heartbeat echo the rhythm of this relentless journey. You trudge onward, leaving the cliffs and carnage of the Laestrygonians behind, the horizon stretching like an endless promise that somehow conceals endless peril. You probably won't survive imagining the relief mingled with the exhaustion of Odysseus's crew without feeling the tension in your own shoulders, as if the sea itself weighs you down. Historians still argue whether this segment of the journey represents a literal voyage or a symbolic trial of human endurance. But as you watch, the fatigue and psychological strain are palpable, weaving through the men like a heavy fog. Quirky anecdotes emerge even amid survival. Some stories suggest that sailors began talking to the wind, treating it as a sentient companion, which historians still debate as mythic whimsy or actual ancient seafaring superstition. You trudge along as Odysseus keeps the men focused, alternating between stern command and carefully crafted encouragement, each word a tether to reality. You probably won't survive picturing seasoned warriors pleading with invisible forces or trying to negotiate with the ocean without a faint smile at human absurdity. Ahead looms the island of Circe, wrapped in green forests and the scent of wild herbs that swirl across the deck, drifting in with a hypnotic sweetness. You trudge ashore, noticing how easily beauty can mask danger. Historians still argue whether Circe represents an actual location or a symbolic embodiment of temptation and distraction. But the narrative's tension is immediate. A single misstep, and the men's focus and very lives could dissolve. Circe's hall is striking, almost unnervingly pristine. You trudge past polished floors and glimmering walls as Odysseus and his men enter cautiously, senses sharpened. Quirky asides linger. Some suggest her halls were filled with animals she had transformed, perhaps exotic pets or familiar beasts, which historians still debate as literal enchantments or metaphorical lessons in restraint and perception. You probably won't survive imagining loyal men sitting beside enchanted pigs or beasts without a quiet laugh at the surrealism tinged with fear. As night descends, Circe emerges herself, radiant yet unnervingly composed, her gaze assessing the men like a chess player sizing up pieces on a board. You trudge through the unfolding drama, the mingling of caution, charm, and latent threat pulling you into the spell of the story. Historians still debate whether her powers were intended as literal magic or as a narrative device, highlighting human susceptibility to seduction and distraction. But the lesson lands as sharply as a blade. Vigilance, wisdom, and discernment are as crucial as courage on any journey. You probably won't survive imagining Odysseus negotiating between charm and threat without a sense of exhilaration. Yet, it is precisely this balance of danger and strategy that sets the stage for the next 10-year odyssey of trials. You trudge alongside Odysseus as he secures his men against Circe's spell, feeling the chill of uncertainty despite the warm glow of the hall around you. You probably won't survive imagining the tension between enchantment and reason as men slowly revert from animals to their human form without a shiver that runs from your scalp to your toes. historians still argue whether the transformations were meant as literal magic or allegorical lessons on human vulnerability to distraction. But for you, the fear and fascination are indistinguishable. Quirky tales linger in the shadows. Some suggest Odysseus used a mysterious herb called moly to resist Circe's charms, a plant with roots in both Greek lore and obscure botanical speculation, which historians still debate as mythic invention or real knowledge of herbal pharmacology. You trudge carefully, noting how the aroma clings to clothing and skin, a tangible reminder of both protection and danger. You probably won't survive picturing a crew of men who moments ago squealed as pigs, now blinking in bewilderment at their restored forms, without a small smile at the absurdity mingled with relief. Time stretches unnaturally in Circe's hall, the rhythm of day and night distorted by enchantment and curiosity. You trudge through long conversations with the sorceress, the exchange of information, warnings, and subtle tests of character. Historians still debate whether this episode emphasizes strategy and cunning or simply the allure of female power in mythic storytelling. But you feel the gravity in Odysseus's careful choices, the measured patience that marks him as both leader and survivor. Quirky observations arise. Supposedly, some of Circe's animals retained human-like expressions, watching their former companions with silent judgment, a detail historians still debate as narrative flourish or symbolic warning. You trudge past these silent witnesses, imagining the tension of loyalty and fear that courses through the men, understanding that leadership is often as much about managing perception and morale as it is about confronting physical threats. You probably won't survive picturing this intricate balance of persuasion, caution, and human folly without a quiet shiver. Eventually, Odysseus negotiates a truce, securing both guidance and hospitality for the next leg of the journey. You trudge alongside as he absorbs maps, instructions, and cryptic warnings from Circe, the scent of herbs lingering in the air, the quiet rustle of transformed animals around your feet. Historians still argue whether Circe's advice foreshadows literal events or serves as allegory for the necessity of foresight, prudence, and preparation. But for you, the story resonates. Survival on the open sea depends not only on skill and courage, but on patience, discernment, and the wisdom to listen to voices that may seem strange but carry truth. You probably won't survive imagining the next trials awaiting in the uncharted waters without a subtle tightening in your chest. Yet it is this combination of insight, bravery, and strategy that will guide Odysseus and you forward. You trudge carefully into the shadows of the underworld, the air growing cooler, the ground beneath your feet damp and uneven, as Odysseus follows Circe's cryptic instructions to seek the spirits of the dead. You probably won't survive imagining the scent of decay mixed with the cold metallic tang of unseen rivers without a faint shiver climbing your spine. Historians still argue whether this journey to Hades represents a literal descent or a symbolic rite of passage. But the tension and weight of facing the unknown press upon you like the hull of a ship caught in a storm. Quirky details flicker at the edges of your mind. Some tales suggest that ghosts approach in the form of flickering shadows or whispering winds, curious but harmless unless provoked, which historians still debate as narrative invention or a reflection of ancient Greek beliefs about spirits. You trudge on as Odysseus makes offerings of blood to attract the souls he must speak with, the ritual precise and careful, the air humming with the invisible energy of expectation. You probably won't survive imagining a spectral audience leaning in for a taste of sacrifice without a shiver and a quiet laugh at human imagination at work. The first spirit to approach is Tiresias, the blind prophet whose gaze seems to pierce beyond the veil of time. You trudge silently as Odysseus listens intently, absorbing warnings about the journey ahead, the dangers of the sun god's cattle, and the necessity of discipline among his crew. Historians still debate whether Tiresias's predictions were intended as prophecy or as narrative foreshadowing. But for you, the tension of foresight, knowing what may come but powerless to change immediate events, is tangible and pressing. Quirky asides abound. Some legends suggest Odysseus accidentally insults minor spirits, prompting them to flit about in annoyance or frustration, which historians still argue may have been comic relief woven into a dark scene. You trudge past these ghostly scuffles, noting how quickly missteps, even in the spiritual realm, can have consequences, a lesson echoing across both the material and ethereal planes. You probably won't survive imagining spirits shushing each other or gesturing at Odysseus without a wry smile at Homeric humor. As more spirits appear, the fallen comrades, distant kings, and even tragic women, Odysseus listens, learns, and takes careful mental notes. You trudge alongside, absorbing the sorrow, the longing, and the wisdom they impart. Historians still argue whether this episode serves as a moral reflection on mortality or a narrative device to heighten suspense. But for you, it is impossible to ignore the duality of fear and understanding, grief and instruction. You probably won't survive picturing the eerie, mournful chorus of voices mingling with Odysseus's thoughtful silence without a subtle tightening in your chest. Yet it is precisely in this shadowed encounter that the seeds of survival, patience, and foresight are sown, guiding the course of a decade-long odyssey through uncharted seas and perilous lands. You trudge carefully back to the world of sunlight, the chill of the underworld slowly retreating as the horizon brightens with an almost hesitant dawn. You probably won't survive imagining the relief and lingering unease mixing together like salt and sweat on your skin without a shiver that tickles the back of your neck. Historians still argue whether the journey to the underworld is a symbolic passage of knowledge or a literal adventure through mystical geography. But for you, the weight of what Odysseus carries, prophecy, warning, memory, feels tangible, pressing, unavoidable. Quirky details drift like foam on waves. Some accounts say Odysseus accidentally steps on ghostly footprints that vanish instantly, a reminder of the ephemeral nature of spirit and story, which historians still debate as comic embellishment or symbolic metaphor. You trudge along as the crew takes cautious oars, each man aware of unseen forces lingering beyond perception, the rhythm of the ships a grounding melody against the lingering chill of mortality. You probably won't survive picturing men murmuring prayers to unseen powers while trying to stay upright on the rocking deck, without a quiet smile at their human vulnerability. Ahead, Scylla and Charybdis loom like twin nightmares, one a multi-headed beast of sudden strikes, the other a whirlpool hungry for the unwary. You trudge onward, hearts pounding, imagining the sharp snap of teeth and the roar of churning water. Historians still debate whether these creatures were inspired by natural hazards or allegorical threats, but for you, the fear is immediate, your senses straining with every creak of timber and splash of wave. Quirky asides whisper in the wind. Sailors reportedly tossed offerings into Charybdis as if to appease a grumpy landlord, a behavior historians still argue reflects superstition or narrative whimsy. You trudge past these small rituals, noting the human need for control, for a semblance of negotiation with forces far larger than oneself. You probably won't survive imagining the balance of luck, strategy, and sheer nerve without a tightening in your chest as Odysseus plots the narrowest path between horror and safety. As the ships pass, Scylla claims a few, a stark reminder of mortality, while Charybdis swallows what it can't quite reach. You trudge beside the fleet, noting how Odysseus's leadership, calm timing, and willingness to accept loss secure survival for the majority. Historians still argue whether this sequence teaches courage, faith, or the inevitability of suffering. But for you, the lesson is clear. Resilience, foresight, and steady nerves shape the path through life's most perilous moments. You probably won't survive imagining the narrow escape, the mingled cries and relief, without a pulse-quickening thrill and quiet respect for the cunning and luck that guides Odysseus across these treacherous waters. Section 11. You trudge wearily into the sun-drenched island of Thrinacia, the scent of strange grasses and grazing cattle filling the air, a deceptive calm after the horrors of Scylla and Charybdis. You probably won't survive imagining the tension in Odysseus's crew, exhausted, hungry, and anxious, yet drawn irresistibly to the temptation of these sacred herds, without feeling the pull of curiosity and doubt tug at your own mind. Historians still argue whether this episode symbolizes divine law, human folly, or a blend of both, but the lesson lands with visceral clarity. Temptation is most dangerous when comfort feels earned. Quirky details emerge as you trudge closer. Some accounts suggest the cows themselves were remarkable, rumored to bear markings resembling abstract human faces or symbols, which historians still debate as literal description, mythic exaggeration, or metaphor for sacred authority. You trudge alongside as Odysseus restrains himself and instructs his men not to touch the cattle, emphasizing discipline over desire, foresight over immediate gratification. You probably won't survive picturing the sailors whispering and scheming, eyes darting toward the gleaming hides, without a small shiver at the tension between obedience and instinct. Days pass slowly, the sun climbing and falling like a silent overseer. You trudge with Odysseus as he prays for guidance, the smell of salt mixing with sweet grass, and the gentle creak of timbers grounding the moment in reality. Historians still debate whether this episode dramatizes the inevitability of human error or merely heightens narrative suspense. But for you, the sense of fragile control is palpable, the quiet menace of divine disapproval lingering like heat over the deck. Quirky asides persist. Some sailors supposedly attempted to herd the cows into smaller pens at night, thinking themselves clever, a detail historians still argue as comic relief or cautionary exaggeration. You trudge past their whispers and furtive movements, noting how even the smallest acts of defiance can invite disaster. The delicate interplay of curiosity and command threaded through every glance and gesture. You probably won't survive imagining Odysseus discovering the inevitable breach, the mix of fury, grief, and helplessness washing over him without a tightening in your chest and a quiet acknowledgement of life's merciless consequences. The aftermath is swift and merciless. Zeus, displeased, sends a storm that scatters the ships and drowns nearly all who defied the warning. You trudge silently among the survivors, feeling the weight of loss, the silence of grief, and the burning lesson etched into every broken mast and overturned hull. Historians still argue whether this punishment is literal divine wrath or allegorical narrative shaping, but the resonance is unmistakable. Choices carry consequences, restraint is invaluable, and even a clever mind like Odysseus's cannot always alter fate. You probably won't survive imagining the mix of horror, remorse, and fragile relief without your pulse echoing the tragic cadence of this episode, a reminder that survival demands both skill and humility in a world governed by forces larger than any one man. You trudge forward, the remnants of the storm still clinging to the shattered hulls, the salt in the air stinging your skin as you navigate toward the Aeolian island, where the Wind King Aeolus waits with his bag of controlled gales. You probably won't survive imagining the tension as Odysseus receives this gift, the promise of swift passage counterbalanced by the fragility of trust, without a subtle tightening in your chest. Historians still debate whether this episode symbolizes divine assistance, human folly, or the precarious balance between them. But the lesson is immediate. Power is only as useful as your discipline. Quirky anecdotes linger. Some sources claim the bag of winds made a faint humming noise, like a caged orchestra, which historians still argue as literal description or poetic flourish. You trudge beside Odysseus as he deliberates how much to reveal to his men, the air thick with both hope and the potential for catastrophe. You probably won't survive picturing the sailors' curiosity gnawing at their restraint, fingers twitching near the forbidden bag, without a shiver at the delicate tension between knowledge and obedience. The journey begins, winds at your back, waves dancing beneath the ships, a rare moment of ease. You trudge along with them, feeling the exhilaration of near-perfect control, the horizon stretching invitingly. Historians still debate whether this brief serenity represents a narrative lull or a lesson in hubris, but the exhilaration is tangible, your chest rising and falling with each surge of wind and swell of the sea. Quirky details emerge as you move. Some sailors, convinced that a secret treasure lurks within the bag itself, speculate wildly about the wind's personalities or moods, a detail historians still argue as whimsical storytelling or reflection of human imagination. You trudge past their murmurs, noting the tension building silently, each moment carrying the weight of impending disaster. You probably won't survive picturing Odysseus discovering the betrayal as the bag is opened, unleashing chaos without a jolt of anxiety mingled with recognition of human fallibility. The winds escape, scattering ships and men alike, a stark reminder that control is fleeting and temptation irresistible. You trudge through the aftermath, surveying the wreckage and collecting fragments of both ships and courage. Historians still argue whether this narrative turn highlights moral lessons, inevitability of fate, or the perils of curiosity. But the resonance is undeniable. Survival, like fortune, demands vigilance, foresight, and an unshakable focus on the path ahead. You probably won't survive imagining the mixture of awe, fear, and sorrow among Odysseus's men without a pulse-quickening empathy, a subtle reminder that even genius and preparation can falter when human nature intervenes. You trudge cautiously toward the island of the Lotus Eaters, the landscape shimmering with an almost hypnotic haze, flowers and fruit gleaming under the Mediterranean sun. You probably won't survive imagining the crew's exhaustion making them vulnerable to temptation, each inhale drawing them closer to forgetfulness, without a sense of slow unease crawling up your spine. Historians still debate whether the Lotus Eaters were a literal tribe, a symbolic representation of distraction, or an allegory for the seductive pull of indolence. But the lesson hits like the first wave on a rocky shore. Even the strongest resolve can falter when faced with alluring oblivion. Quirky tidbits drift in the narrative. Some accounts suggest the lotus itself had a mild, almost narcotic effect, causing visions of idyllic beaches or lost cities, which historians still argue may reflect real botanical properties or poetic exaggeration. You trudge among Odysseus's men as he observes the slow shift from duty to enchantment, the subtle droop of shoulders and glazed eyes, a stark reminder of the mind's vulnerability. You probably won't survive picturing seasoned warriors wandering languidly toward an endless sunlit horizon, forgetting their mission entirely, without a small shiver at the fragility of human focus. Odysseus reacts with calculated urgency, gathering his men and dragging them back to the ships, their minds partially shrouded by memory and desire. You trudge beside him, feeling the tension between compassion and necessity, understanding that leadership often requires forceful guidance against the allure of comfort. Historians still debate whether this episode highlights cunning, physical strength, or psychological insight. But the immediacy of the struggle is undeniable. Quirky observations surface. Some stories claim Odysseus had to physically tie a few men to the benches to prevent them from straying further, a detail historians still argue as literal, symbolic, or humorous embellishment. You trudge past the languid figures, noting the precarious balance of care, authority, and quick thinking. You probably won't survive imagining the mix of resistance, relief, and lingering days among the men without a quiet smile at human weakness magnified by exotic circumstance. As the ships depart, leaving the Lotus Eaters behind, you trudge with a renewed sense of caution, eyes scanning the horizon for the next unseen threat. Historians still argue whether this episode was intended primarily as entertainment, moral instruction, or psychological insight. But for you, the resonance is immediate. vigilance, restraint, and leadership are as crucial as courage and skill in guiding oneself and others through the unpredictable currents of life. You probably won't survive imagining the lingering effect of the lotus on memory, focus, and morale without a subtle tightening in your chest. Yet it is this mixture of hazard and learning that propels Odysseus ever closer to Ithaca, shaping both the journey and the traveler alike. You trudge wearily toward the shores of the Sirens, the air thick with the scent of salt, sun, and the faint, almost imperceptible perfume of danger. You probably won't survive imagining the haunting melody drifting across the waves, teasing your mind with promises of knowledge, pleasure, and oblivion without a shiver that crawls from your scalp down to your toes. Historians still debate whether the sirens were meant to symbolize literal creatures, the perilous allure of temptation, or the irresistible pull of distraction. But the tension is immediate and visceral. Quirky details float like foam on the water. Some accounts describe the sirens with the bodies of birds and the faces of women, an image that historians still argue as a literal mythological depiction or a metaphorical warning. You trudge alongside Odysseus as he plugs the ears of his men with beeswax, crafting an ingenious barrier against enchantment, while tying himself firmly to the mast, determined to experience the song without succumbing. You probably won't survive picturing him writhing against the ropes, torn between desire and discipline, without a thrill of empathetic tension. The ships draw nearer, the music weaving around you like invisible threads. You trudge along, aware that even the bravest sailor could be undone in a moment of distraction. That curiosity, knowledge, and desire are simultaneously tools and threats. Historians still debate whether this episode primarily emphasizes ingenuity, self-control, or the inherent dangers of curiosity. But for you, the peril is immediate and almost touchable. Quirky asides emerge. Some stories claim that sailors who heard the song and survived were said to experience lingering whispers in their dreams, a detail historians still argue as poetic flourish or reflective of ancient storytelling techniques. You trudge past the captivated yet restrained crew, noting the subtle variations in their breathing, their silent prayers, and their reliance on Odysseus's foresight. You probably won't survive imagining the delicate balance between sensation and restraint, the intoxicating pull of the siren's melody against the sturdy ropes of reason. As the final notes fade, the danger past, you trudge with a mix of relief and exhilaration. Historians still argue whether the episode is a testament to leadership, human resilience, or the power of strategy. But for you, the resonance is clear. Wisdom, preparation, and self-discipline are as critical as courage and strength in navigating the treacherous waters of life. You probably won't survive imagining Odysseus releasing himself from the mast, the crew exhaling in unison, and the horizon stretching ahead with the promise of home without a subtle tightening in your chest and a quiet smile at human ingenuity, daring, and perseverance, knowing that the final stretch toward Ithaca now lies just beyond the waves. You trudge slowly toward Ithaca, the familiar outlines of the homeland faint on the horizon. Yet every step is weighed down by 10 years of toil, temptation, and terror. You probably won't survive imagining the exhaustion and anticipation mixing together like salt water and sweat without a tight knot forming in your chest. A mixture of hope, fear, and longing. Historians still debate whether Odysseus's journey is primarily a literal adventure, a moral allegory, or a psychological exploration of human endurance. But the immediacy of the homecoming is undeniable, and the lessons of each encounter echo like a chorus through your mind. Quirky details surface as you trudge closer. Some tales claim that Odysseus's beard had grown thick and silvered, and his cloak tattered yet sturdy, a detail historians still argue as poetic license or symbolic of resilience. You trudge alongside him as he surveys the rocky coastline, imagining the hidden obstacles and waiting suitors, feeling both the pride of surviving so much and the nervous anticipation of reclaiming what was lost. You probably won't survive picturing the tension coiling in his shoulders, the meticulous strategy forming in his mind, without a subtle tightening in your chest at the weight of responsibility carried silently for years. Odysseus approaches Ithaca's palace in disguise, every movement calculated, every glance measured. You trudge silently with him as he observes the suitors, the once grand halls now crowded with chaos and arrogance, the air thick with the scent of wine, sweat, and entitlement. Historians still debate whether this moment is intended to underscore cunning, justice, or divine intervention, but the narrative weight is palpable. Patience and strategy have finally converged into action. Quirky asides ripple through the tale. Some accounts suggest Penelope tested Odysseus by mentioning an impossible bed construction, a detail historians still argue as narrative invention or clever allegory. You trudge with him, noting the careful timing, the silent recognition, and the layers of trust, loyalty, and intelligence that must align to reclaim what is rightfully his. You probably won't survive imagining the intricate web of recognition, deceit, and emotional reunion without a shiver and a smile at the enduring cleverness of both Odysseus and Penelope. Finally, the suitors are dealt with, the palace restored, and order returning to Ithaca. You trudge through the quiet aftermath, observing the calm settling over the halls, the subtle repairs, and the gentle reclaiming of home and identity. Historians still argue whether the ending is more about justice, divine will, or the triumph of human resilience. But for you, the resonance is unmistakable. Perseverance, cunning, discipline, and courage converge to shape destiny. You probably won't survive imagining Odysseus resting, the first true night of peace in over a decade, without a deep sigh of relief and a quiet recognition that this journey, with all its perils and lessons, has forged not just a hero, but the very essence of endurance and wisdom itself. The sun dips gently beyond the hills of Ithaca, painting the sky in soft amber and rose, and you trudge slowly through the quiet halls with Odysseus, feeling the tension of years begin to melt into calm. You probably won't survive imagining the soft creak of doors, the subtle hum of night insects, and the warm weight of peace settling over your shoulders without a sense of release. The journey has been long, perilous, and transformative, but now the air is thick with the gentle sigh of relief, and each breath feels like reclaiming a small piece of yourself. Quirky details linger in the mind. Some traditions say that even the trees in Ithaca whispered the hero's return, leaves trembling as though alive, which historians still debate as symbolic storytelling or actual ritual belief. You move through this world with Odysseus, noticing the faint smells of bread cooling on the hearth, the subtle glimmer of the sea just beyond the palace walls, the soft weight of memories threading between past and present. You probably won't survive imagining the quiet laughter and gentle tears of reunion without a slow smile, a soft tightening of your chest, and a sensation of ease gradually unfurling in your muscles. Historians still argue about the precise lessons of this decade-long wandering, whether it emphasizes endurance, cunning, divine intervention, or moral instruction, but the essence is unmistakable. The journey shapes the traveler as much as the destination, and each trial leaves a mark that is invisible yet deeply felt. You trudge through the quiet corridors of memory, retracing every storm, every temptation, every encounter with the unknown, and you feel the weight of survival, the thrill of overcoming, and the tender hum of reflection coalescing into something almost tangible. The night stretches around you like soft velvet, and you feel the gentle pulse of time slowing. You probably won't survive imagining the gradual settling of energy, the soft embrace of shadows, the quiet assurance of home without a gentle sigh or a lingering sense of wonder. The scent of salt water, the echo of waves, and the memory of adventure intertwine with comfort, and you feel a gentle tug toward sleep, toward surrender, toward trust that the world continues even as you rest. Your heartbeat slows, your eyelids droop, and the memories of Odysseus's cunning, resilience, and relentless courage drift through your mind like soft lanterns along a darkened path. You probably won't survive imagining the gradual fading of tension, the soft hum of existence, and the tender reassurance of completion without a sigh of contentment, a subtle acknowledgement of the journey's lessons, and a quiet whisper of gratitude for the stories that guide, challenge, and transform.